My name is Ejfa Toney. I serve as the National Field Director for Moms Clean Air Force. We're an organization of over 1.2 million moms, dads, grandmas, abuelas, parents that are committed to focusing on the impacts of climate and protecting our children from the dangers of air pollution. I came to this work as a recovering politician. I served as the first African-American, first female and youngest mayor of Greenville, Mississippi back in 2004. And I served for two terms from 2004 to 2012. And it's interesting because I'm from the Mississippi Delta, and I really never thought of the impacts of climate in just sort of my day-to-day life and day-to-day work. But the more I began my life in public service, the more I saw how the very things that are around us, the air that we breathe, the water we drink, the land that we stand on. As a Mississippian, I found that these things were intricately woven into our success and lack thereof. And so I really began to take a lot of interest into how the climate and environment really impacted people, particularly people in the Delta, poor people, people who are from different demographics. And that led me to working with the Environmental Protection Agency, Lisa Jackson. Administrator Jackson came to Mississippi actually as part of one of her first stops. She was the first Black woman to serve as a EPA administrator. And she came and she said to me, "Heather, you know you're doing some environmental justice work." I said, "Really?" She said, "Yeah, that's what this is." And it really just sort of spurred me into taking a deeper look at both what I had been doing personally, but also what was happening in our country. I then went to serve in the Obama-Biden administration as regional administrator for EPA over the entire Southeast. And there, my work covered a quarter of the nation's population, over 8 states, 6 tribes, and just some of the most beautiful but most diverse landscape our country has. And I was honored to serve in that space because I was, again, helping people every single day on the ground, talking about environmental issues and how do we protect ourselves from the impacts of climate change and really look to achieve environmental justice as a part of our strategy. At the end of the administration, I got pregnant with my first child. It was a beautiful time because not only was Devin a surprise, he was a blessed surprise because my husband and I didn't think I could have any kids. And we really laughed in the EPA because it was such a critical time. Gina McCarthy, she was the administrator. She said, "Heather, you picked a heck of a time to have a baby." And she was absolutely right. But I really began to feel some of the impacts that mothers and children were experiencing every single day. I was pregnant at the height of Zika. So understanding the impacts of a pandemic upon pregnant women is very real to me right now with coronavirus because I had to deal with that with Zika. I was pregnant and then breastfeeding when Flint happened. And so making that connection between a breastfeeding mother and just wanting to make sure that your child has the best possible nutrition, but recognizing that water could be dangerous. I felt that deeply. I was an administrator working with women who were farm workers and who were telling me stories about how they would come home and would have to take off their clothes because of the toxic chemicals that were on their clothing and having to push away their children for just a moment, a toddler running to grab you and saying, "Mommy," and you having to physically stop because you don't want them to come in contact with those toxins. I was feeling that very deeply at that point in my life. And so that's why it was such a natural progression for me to begin my work with Moms Clean Air Force, because understanding why and how we should protect our children and ensure their future was paramount in my life and continues to be so. And I think even now, when we're talking about the impacts of climate change, when we talk about pollution, when we talk about what we can do, the first thing that comes top of mind for me is children, our children's future, how we give them both the tools for success, but also the faith to keep working, and that we can achieve this. I think it really embodies not only who I am, but who I hope to continue to grow to become. When I reflect on my earliest memories of working in environmental issues and justice, I can't help but think of my godmother's gardens and being in the Mississippi Delta environment where everybody was connected to the land or to the elements in some way, but we really just did not think of ourselves as environmentalists. Um, Both my godmothers, and I call them that very affectionately, Lubertha Irvin, who is still alive and has a garden in her backyard right now today, and Ciola Thomas, who has passed away. I can vividly remember collard greens, mustard greens, tomatoes, right outside the back door, and it being a part of the culture that I grew up in. People would always bring fresh vegetables to our house or drop off food. It was just a part of Southern culture, I think Black or white, that there was this connection to people and to land. And so this automatic assumption that the land is good, it is not toxic, was something that just seemed second nature to me. So when I got a bit older and I was in college, I was a legislative intern to Senator Donzella James in the Georgia State Legislature. And one of the first assignments that I had was to work in the East Point community because they were protesting toxic chemicals in a plant. And I remember going to the community meeting and it taking me a minute to sort of really connect. Wait a minute, the people are talking about their actual land is toxic. What is this? Because in my brain, again, I came from a space where you go in your backyard and you can plant things and it's perfectly fine. And here I was in another Black community and they're saying, no, our soil is actually bad. We can't do this. And so that's where I really think I began to make like a connection between the fact that the things that I took for granted as being everyday, absolutely okay for people to do, that we have this inherent right, an assumption that our land and our air and our water is okay, was not the same for everybody. That certainly stayed with me. And as I continued through school and I completed my law degree, I went to school at Tulane University, and where there's an environmental law clinic there, and just recognizing that there's so many different aspects to environmental concerns, more than just what we think an environmentalist is. Um, there is a tendency, I think, for society to place an image on what an environmentalist looks like. And that image did not look like me. The image of what society says an environmentalist looked like was a white male or female wearing Birkenstocks, hugging a tree, uh, or being vegan, or protecting polar bears. It was not anything that I could identify with in my community or my experience. I wasn't seeing Black people, Black or brown people. I wasn't seeing people who still ate meat or bacon like I do. I wasn't seeing these connections to my everyday life in terms of the good side of being an environmentalist. What I saw from people who looked like me was fighting against environmental injustices. And so from that period of working in Senator Donzella James's office, to coming back home to Mississippi, to running for mayor of my own hometown, one of the first things that I tackled was brown water. Our community has traditionally always had dark brown water. If you were to run a bathtub full of water, it would look like tea. And while I grew up in that, and if you ask anyone in Greenville, Mississippi today, they will tell you that we believe our water has magical powers. It is extremely soft, but the image of it, again, people who are coming from out of town, industry, tourism, no one wants to go to a restaurant and they bring you a glass of brown water and you think that it's okay to drink it. So I began to address these concerns and issues and to learn more and more about this and the impact that it was having on our community. I learned that our water was filtered through ancient cypress preserves, which actually worked as a filter, but there were still a number of dynamics that impacted us having to do with infrastructure concerns that we needed to address. If you're in a poor or impoverished community, as much of the Mississippi Delta is, there's not a tax base there to ensure that we are constantly upgrading our infrastructure. It means that people are energy poor. It means that folks who can't afford to pay high water bills and high electricity bills are the very people who are tasked with paying high water bills and high electricity bills. And so I was learning all of this at the same time and just made the decision that there's anything that I can do to help to rectify and bring equity to this space and bring attention to these issues, then that certainly was my call to action. Now, I have to tell you that I am the daughter of a school teacher and a retired attorney who started his career in civil rights. My parents came to Mississippi as a part of that movement. And so the ideals of social justice have been ingrained into my very being, I think, since birth. So I think of climate action and climate justice through a lens of social justice, which makes it, again, why I think environmental issues are really at the top of what I think of as bringing equity, changing that scope and lens of how people see themselves as an environmentalist, and ultimately taking that little girl that grew up in the Mississippi Delta and played in gardens and showing her that yes, you too are environmentalists. And just because the images that you see are not reflective of you, it just means you have to change the lens. And that's really, I think, how I came to this work. I believe strongly that environmental justice is the social justice issue of our time. And I have wonderful conversations with my father because he was his social justice movement has been voting access and voting rights. And I remember that when I came out of law school, I went back to work with my father. And one of the first assignments that I had was to do some election monitoring here in Mississippi to make sure that people had access to vote. And so I fast forward to today, and when he and I talk about these social justice movements and their connections, and I talk so passionately about climate, we bridge these generational gaps, and it's absolutely beautiful because we talk about how even something like voting rights and voting access, which was and still is paramount to my dad, is so intricately weaved with climate action. If you look at polls today, and there's a Pew Research poll, there's a Harvard study, I believe, or I'm sorry, not Harvard, a Yale study, and almost every single poll will show you that Black and brown people are the demographic that are most likely to vote on climate issues. Yet this is the demographic that is being attacked right now when it comes to access to voting. So the very people that we need to ensure can get to the polls because they're going to vote on issues dealing with climate action that we need to have take place are the very same people who are still not being allowed access to that right to vote. So just seeing how these social justice issues are very interconnected and being again able to have that conversation with someone as close to me as my father just really shows why climate action is not only really the social justice movement for our time, but how it connects every other social justice movement that we've experienced in this country. Because the dynamics of climate change and the climate crisis can be so big and so broad that it scares people. And it makes people say, you know what, I don't want to tackle that. That's too big. Let me go work on something else. And I push back against that because this is an issue, while it looms very large over our globe, there are absolutely things that we can do every single day, small items that incorporate the largeness of this issue, but give us a role to play in it. And so I think of small things because I have little children. And I think of the things that my 4-year-old can do every single day that encourage me to continue to do the big things. My son is 4, my daughter is 14, and it really amazed me how when he was really little, when he was about 2, she was teaching him the difference between recycle and trash. And it was because I taught her what things we're supposed to recycle and which things we put in the trash. Now, this may seem really tiny, but it was such a huge step for me to recognize that as a parent, I don't have to reteach that lesson because my children were teaching it to each other. So right now, at 4 years old, if you were to come into my house and you have a plastic bottle that needs to be thrown away and you move towards the garbage can, my 4-year-old would stop you and take it and put it in the recycle because his brain is now wired that plastics and paper go into the recycle bin. That is a really little small step, but it is making a huge difference in the next generation. As parents, we should really begin to think about training our children to do and act differently, because that's putting us on the path of recognizing that we're making a shift in terms of how we think about our response to the environment and also what our next generation is going to do. Now, that does not take away from the fact that we know the International Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, is still giving us a limited amount of time to make some significant change in reducing carbon emissions on the globe, in the planet, so that we're not at a place of irreversible change. And that's where people sort of get into the scary part. This is where we have to take these actions, like making sure that we're voting, that we are very well aware of what our administration is doing, that we are demanding that agencies like the Environmental Protection Agency immediately stop any and all attacks that they have on regulation and safety. We are demanding that they stop their rollbacks and looking at ways that through policy actions we can reverse these things. This is where we take the time as individuals to make sure we are aware of what our industries are doing. Are they continuing to pollute? Are we supporting them in that? And taking these actions that we can do as individuals, but coming together collectively to have a big, huge difference. And I like the fact that the climate movement is so broad and so diverse that you can pick an area and say, I'm going to focus on this. So if it is renewable energy and you want to focus on ensuring that there's access to renewable energy, a way to access a grid that is sustainable and that people can have a energy at a reasonable rate, then you can focus on that and you are making a difference. If you want to focus on cleanup of land, then there is a space for you to do that. If you want to focus on health and climate and ensuring that people are not suffering under sickness because of impacts to climate, if you want to focus resiliency, there is a place for you. So I think about the climate movement and what we can do, not in a way of it's so big, oh my gosh, how are we going to solve that? But in terms of there are so many different opportunities for us to jump into. You can basically pick one, focus on it, and just work on that one, knowing that you are a part of a larger collective. And together we can make this happen. The most dangerous aspect, the most dangerous thing that's really facing us today with the climate emergency is complacency. This idea that by just not doing anything at all, we'll be fine. Uh, I have seen extreme weather come faster and stronger than ever before. And I served as mayor when Greenville began to see 500-year flood events happen within 2 years of each other. That was in 2004 to 2012. It's 2020 now. And just last year, there were record floods that ravaged the Mississippi Delta, where lives were lost and property was lost. And it's becoming faster and harder. What's dangerous to me is when I see this complacency, when we're getting used to it. When we think about Katrina and those images that we saw from New Orleans, from a hurricane that was absolutely massive, it shocked our conscience. We had never seen anything like that before. Yet today, when we hear of a hurricane season that is bigger and larger than any one Katrina, because notice the word that I use, season, not just one hurricane, but a season of them. And it doesn't shock our conscience in the same way. To me, that is dangerous because it indicates that we have not accepted this issue as being one that demands our immediate attention. The other concern that I have is that there is an opposition that is trying to use the distractions of climate impacts against the climate movement. And what do I mean by that? We are suffering some of the most dynamic travesties and social awareness that we have ever dealt with at our time. The death of George Floyd, the shooting of Ahmaud Arbery, understanding the racial dynamics that are prevalent throughout our country right now, and seeing coronavirus ravage our nation certainly demand not only our attention, but our action. The dangerous side, though, is that there is an opposition and a movement of people who are using the cover of these things to continue to roll back regulations, to continue to take advantage for industries that are polluters, and using it as a means to gain for themselves as opposed to really addressing issues of these social dynamics that could be helpful to all of us. It was no mistake when we began to see states reopen once they realized who was on the front lines. Because not only are our doctors and nurses dealing with coronavirus, our bus drivers, janitors who are in those hospitals, teachers who are certainly in a position right now where they're trying to figure out if they're going to be on the front line. And they're having to do it in a climate emergency. We can't forget that. We can't forget that we're fighting pandemics, we're fighting racial injustice in the middle of a climate emergency. That's significant. So it's very dangerous to me when we begin to forget these connections and we allow people to use the cover of these very, very dynamic issues to allow these things to go by. Now, I know there are some who are going to say, well, what about carbon emissions, or what about coal, or what about, these different separate dynamics of climate change where, yes, we want to focus on, but, is one of those higher than the other? Again, I have to sort of pull back and look at a much broader picture, because we can't address any one of these in particular without recognizing the impacts to people on the ground. And these are the people that we need to support us in our decision-making process. We need people, groundswells of people, to support these actions so that they really embrace them and then put them into practice in their day-to-day lives. We can come up with the greatest ideas of the world, but if you don't have a mother of three that's at home that can actually do it and benefit from it, what good is it? The people aren't going to embrace it. So that's where we have to be. And this idea of complacency is one of the most dangerous things that I think we could be ever dealing with in climate right now. Climate mitigation programs have to have three components. One, you have to have resources in order to put those mitigating ideas into practice. Two, you have to have a willing body, government that is looking at the policies to make sure that they are implementable. And then three, you have to have the people who are going to continue that practice to make it successful. It's a three-legged stool. And if any one of those is off, then you got a bit of a problem. What we are seeing right now is because the federal government has not been as supportive of national policy, you have local mayors and governors who have taken up the mantle and are doing their own climate mitigation, their own resiliency and sustainability projects for the benefit of people within their communities. And you have a number that are being extremely successful. So recall the We're All In, We're Still In campaign that happened a few years ago. After the U.S. withdrew from the Paris Climate Agreement, you had mayors and governors who stood up and said that we're going to continue and we're going to make these decisions. And we began to see a string of events take place. For example, we saw states and cities committing to reducing their emissions by 50%, by 100%, by 2030, 2050. You see these numbers starting to roll. That came from local action. That's local ground level, groundswell mitigation and resiliency that shows that there is a strong desire from communities to see this action in place, and that people understand the benefit long term for their homes and for their children. We've got to see more of that, I believe, and support those mayors and states that are taking those actions and really begin to regionalize it, adding the support that they need, the cover that they need. It's one of the things that I love about moms. As a former mayor and a mom, I know you don't necessarily want to see a group of parents sitting in your city council chamber and you don't know that they're there to support you, right? You want to make sure that your constituency base is on your side. And with moms, we provide those mayors and governors that opportunity to say, hey, we're with you. We're going to support you on this climate action. Even if no one else is sitting in this chamber with you, we want you to know that we're here with you. We'll sit on your boards and your commissions to help make sound policy decisions that will provide resources to the community. We will write our federal legislators to ask to make sure that they're funding grant opportunities. We will talk to our local businesses to talk about how we can leverage these resources and create job opportunities within cities that are sustainable and are green initiated. So bringing these three legs of the stool together, I think, is important to ensure that climate mitigation is not only started, but that it is sustained, and it is sustained for a long period of time such that people can really see the return on investment for looking at green projects. Moms Clean Air Force is a powerhouse organization of over 1.2 million members across the country. And our members are not all just moms. Our members are moms, dads, aunts, cousins, grandparents, anyone who is a caretaker of children and concerned about children's health, the impacts of climate change, and the dangers of air pollution for our country's children can be a part of Moms and is a welcome member of Moms Clean Air Force. This has been an amazing adventure and journey, and I absolutely love this organization because we represent such a diverse dynamic across the country, from Arizona to New Jersey, from Florida to Michigan. And our organizers and members are so adept at not only explaining the issue, but connecting it to their local communities and then expressing it on a national level, really connecting the dots. And I think that's what makes us so powerful when we go onto the Hill. Anyone who is working in Washington and is a member of Congress or is working in any of those offices, they know that when they see those red and white Moms Clean Air Force shirts walking down the hall, that we are there and we mean business, and that we know the science behind what we're saying as well as the impact of what we're saying. I have seen mothers who've sat in members of Congress's office while bouncing a toddler, breastfeeding a child, and talking very deeply about the impacts of air pollution supported by studies, charts, and graphs. And just the multitasking effort of this amazing group of people, I think, has been profound. Moms Clean Air Force was the brainchild of our senior director, Dominique Browning, and to see how it has grown over the years. We're now 8 years old, so we're still a relatively young organization, but just to see how it has grown and expanded and the requests that we get from all over the country to be a part of a larger movement is a beautiful thing to me. We have a number of different programs that I'm really, really proud of. One is called Ecomadres, and that is a program that focuses on our Latinx community and our Latinx caregivers. And it provides a way for the community to talk very intimately with one another through a lens that they're familiar with. And so the Comadres program is a powerhouse. It is located in a number of our different states, and we have some amazing partners all over the country and host cafecitos online virtually now. So it's a wonderful, wonderful program. The other program that I love is called Faith Force and Community RX. It is our African American faith-based program, and it is a wonderful way that we have talked about environmental justice, environmental health justice, particularly in the African American community. Again, being from the South and being an African American woman of faith, I find special peace in this particular segment of our programming. We develop Bible studies that talk about clean air and climate from a African American faith-based lens, and just to see how powerful that movement has been. It brings joy and peace to my spirit. I absolutely love the program. Moms continues to just grow and flourish, and we encourage people every single day to join us, to look us up online. We're at momscleanairforce.org. We're on Facebook at Clean Air Moms. We're on Twitter at Clean Air Moms. We're on Instagram. So if there's any social media aspect, I don't think we're on TikTok yet. I'm waiting on that one, and I'm not really good at TikTok videos. So I anticipate, though, it'll be coming. But we really love connecting with people who are concerned about our children's health. And I tell you one thing, if there's anything that Washington should do, and that we stress, listen to your mothers. That is our message, and it is resonating loudly. I'm Heather Toney, National Field Director for Moms Clean Air Force, and a former Obama Biden regional administrator for EPA in the Southeast, and a former mayor. But my most important job is mom. And when I think about the climate movement today and why it's so important for all of us to continue our work, it's for the next generation, it's for our families. And so my husband and I often recount the things that we can do better each and every day to make sure that our children are living in a better space. And I hope some of these things may be helpful for you. Make sure now more than ever that we are registered to vote and that we are climate voters looking at the issues that will impact the next generation. If we don't show up and we don't vote on a local, state, and federal level, then we have no access and no right to continue to demand the actions that must take place to protect our children's future. Now more than ever, it is the most important thing that we can do in order to save their lives and to save our planet. We can also start at home and take some small initiatives and some small steps. I know that the climate crisis seems to be looming larger than life, and it can be super scary. But if we take it one bite at a time, one step at a time, then together we can make some changes that absolutely must be our next steps. Environmental justice, climate justice, equity, and justice in every single breath that we take is the most important factor. So whether it is picking up an extra few pieces of recycling, or not accepting the plastics when you go out to eat, or planting herbs in your own garden, find ways within your local community that you can take those small steps, because together they make a huge difference. And it's important for us now more than ever to